So guys, welcome back from lunch. Hope you all had a great lunch. As in, I just had a sandwich from a deli, and well, I'm back in New York every day or every few days out of the year, so I always have to hit up a deli at some point. It was a great time to do it. So hopefully you guys are recharged for lunch. Super excited. So we just started an informal Q&A. So we'll start off before we go back into Q&A. So Nathan asked the question, but anyone can chime in afterwards. You can type it as usual or just speak and unmute yourself. All right, so Nathan, okay. How do you properly approach transitioning to management consulting from a pre-med background? Whoop, give me a second. Got it, give me a second. Let's see. Ta-da. Okay, so the question here, I'm trying to summarize it real quick. Let's see. Okay, so how do you approach transitioning from management consulting from a pre-med background? So a lot of people actually transition to consulting from a pre-med background. Again, it's remember what we focus on. It's like basically transitioning is only two things. It's getting an interview and passing an interview. Getting an interview, you just have to demonstrate that even though you're a pre-med, you're able to do the problem solving, you're able to do the teamwork, the client skills. Again, because you're pre-med, they don't ding you for that. You're an undergrad. So what will end up happening is they're looking for potential for you to be able to set the search there in terms of how to be a consultant. So the best way to start it is obviously depending on would need a little bit more detail. For example, if you're a junior or a senior, but if you are or rising, if you're a rising junior, hopefully you'll have an internship that you can do. If you're a rising senior, using the experience that you currently have. So one of my best friends was a pre-med when he was an undergrad as well. He did research all summer and then used his resume to talk about the problem solving skills. Okay, so two more questions came in. Okay, so a question about choosing between investment banking and my current career path, so consulting and so forth. So investment banking versus consulting, again, is very different. So because investment banking is an entire different conversation in terms of skill set. But one thing is that we have a lot of former investment bankers who transition, who work with us to consulting. The reason being is that for investment banking, you're definitely working a lot more with numbers. You're deeper into the weeds in terms of the financials and so forth. But one thing that people like about banking is that if you want less client interaction, banking is for you, but just as a general rule. But if you want to work more on the strategy side, as well as more into a client facing role, the consulting path would be a lot more appealing. Okay. So question, what's the difference between round one and round two interviews? So in round one interviews is think about it. So let's talk about it take a step back and think about how the process works. So usually firms will have two rounds of interviews, case interview as well as fit, which we'll cover in a few minutes. The purpose of round one is in round one, you're going to be paired up with usually more junior people. So this is like your associates, this is your managers. And then for the final round two, this is more of your senior managers and your partners. So what will happen as you go through this is for round one, they're usually just testing you to figure out, can you actually solve the case? So two things happen is they worry more about, can you solve a business case, so a case interview. The reason being is that ultimately the person who decides if you get an offer is let's say a partner in the firm or a senior manager. And this person is testing you on two things, your thinking abilities, your problem solving skills in case interviews, as well as your fit, which we'll cover in a bit. But for round one, the managers and the associates are thinking, do I feel comfortable enough passing this person to round two to my senior manager as well as my partner who will be interviewing them? So that's the major difference is in terms of the type of people. And second is the type of cases you'll do. So there's a shift in the type. So in round one, it's typically on average more technical in terms of, for example, more math, more graphs and so forth. But in round two, when you're interviewing with partners and senior managers, they kind of get bored with traditional cases. So they'll want to have more of a conversation. As a result, the conversation, you really do need to think on your feet. There's way less graphs, if anything, no graphs. Luckily, sometimes very little math or no math at all, because a partner doesn't want to sit there while you do math. They want to have a conversation with you. So a question might be, for example, in round one, you might be able to evaluate a acquisition of a certain business, and you have the financials and so forth in round one. But in round two, the partner might just say, all right, how would you go about thinking about these companies? Let's have a discussion. And you have a discussion back and forth. They might, again, not always, prepare graphs or math and things like that. And in round two, there's also something that you can do this in round 1 as well, but more important in round 2 is there's something called a stress interview. So basically they just stress test you to see how well you respond to stress. So a partner might say, great, are you sure that's the right answer? What about this? What about that? And so they're kind of pressuring you to see how if you would cave in terms of your thinking. If you were put in a client and a client challenged your thinking and you're in your 20s, would you cave? Again, remember the ultimate question is, do I feel comfortable putting this person in front of my client? And so as a result, round 2, there's a lot more stress tests in terms of what people are able to do and what people are being on. But if you ever make it to round 2, I would focus on a few things. 1, focus on the fit interview a lot because fit matters, which we'll go over. 2nd is be prepared for a stress test. Again, stress tests are great things because if you know it's coming, it is a bonus. So as a McKinsey partner once told me, Davis, I only stress test people I think are going to make it. Think about why that happens. And he would say, I don't want to stress test someone who is going to fail the interview because it leaves a bad impression on their part. And so there's no reason for me to want to stress test someone who I'm going to reject anyways. But someone who I think will be accepted to the firm, I want to see what is the limits of their thinking abilities. I want to see, are they the cream of the crop? Are they the smartest? So if in round 2 you ever get stress test, that is a really good sign. And then the third difference, besides the first one, which is fit, the second one, which is stress test, is third is be prepared to think more on your feet. So you're having a conversation with partners similar to what you would do if you were in an actual meeting. So that's the differences between round 1 and round 2. It's just those 3 things, as I mentioned. And we'll talk a lot more about the fit. Hey guys, welcome to the person who just joined as well. We're just having an informal, no problem. So we're just having an informal Q&A before anyone else. So if anyone has any questions before we dive in to our last few sessions, let me know as well in terms of questions that might have come up over lunch, questions that you didn't want to ask, or questions you just thought of on the spot. But I'll leave a second for everyone to want to chime in. Awesome. All right. Sounds like everything looks great. So welcome back from lunch, everyone. So we're going to pick up where we left off. So give me a second to share my screen again. Okay, so we left off with teaching you the strategies of how to master the case interview. You found out about a lot of people who are even able to master the case interview within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and so forth. So now in the morning, we talked about if consulting is right for you. So let's say that you decided that consulting is right for you. And then you realize that you don't need a big brand name, you don't need a perfect GPA, you don't need business experience to be able to get an interview, and you get an interview. And let's say that you master the case interview, which again, you don't need a business background to pass the case interview, or to master the case interview, you need business to pass it. And then finally, you get the offer, right? Sort of. So there's one more round of interviews you need to go through. And this is what's called the fit interview. Remember that there's one thing that you're doing on is, do you fit the culture of the firm? So what is the fit interview? So the fit interview, or the behavioral interview is another name for it, or at McKinsey it's called the personal experience interview, the PEI. So it takes place during the interview day. And what the interviewer will do is they're going to ask you a series of questions to learn a little bit more about you and if they enjoy working with you. So the fit interview talks a lot about your past experiences. So you've probably seen these questions in other interviews, like tell me about yourself. Walk me through a time that you solved a hard problem, why consulting. So they just want to get to know a little bit more about the motivations of who you are and how you got to where you are today. So the fit interview can last as little as one question for 5 minutes, or it can last an entire interview session of 30 minutes or longer if that's what the firm wants to have. And just realize that the fit is super important. So we had a client last week who just got his McKinsey offer, but he actually did it in round 3. So one of you guys already know, we talked about round 2, 1-1, round 2. But the reason why he was given a round 3 was this, is that he made it past round 1 and then past 2, solved the cases. They were easy. He practiced a lot. But the one thing that happened was that the partner didn't feel that he was a good enough fit for the firm just yet. But because he was good, they did an entire round where they did another case, round 3, of fit as well as the interview. And so we practiced with him purely just on the fit the week leading up to round 3, and eventually got the offer, and they told him that his stories were fantastic. So the fit, again, very important, especially for the later rounds. And amazingly, it's also similar to the case, very learnable. So I'm going to give you an example of what a fit interview looks like, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So in this one, I give a short answer to a question about that's asked. It's actually, this question was actually asked me in a Bain final round interview about what I like to do for fun. So again, I will go over the most common questions. This is one of the questions, not the most common, but I just want to give you an example of what the fit or behavioral interview is like so that we're all on the same page for this section.
What do you like to do for fun?
I love doing magic, especially card tricks. The first time I ever went to a magic show was 5 years old in Vegas, and I remember just being hooked ever since. In fact, for all I wanted for Christmas and for my birthday was a starter kit to learn how to do magic. And over the years, I've added more to my inventory and it became a side passion of mine. From the time I was 5 to the time I was 13. Unfortunately, when I was 13, academics started taking over and the magic pretty much stayed locked in my closet. But fortunately, when I was 18, I graduated from high school. I had nothing planned for the summer. Before college, I decided to pull back out all the magic kits and started relearning some of the tricks that had amused me since the time I was 5. In fact, I loved it so much that when I was at Yale, I was so lucky to discover there was a magic society. And that 3 of the members are some of my closest friends today. Every Tuesday for 3 hours, we would just go into the basement of one of our dorms and just start jamming and start doing new magic tricks, trying to imitate some of our favorite magicians. And the result of this is that every month we put together a benefit show where all the ticket proceeds will donate to a charity that is doing some good work. So for example, last year when there was a tsunami in the Philippines, we donated to several organizations that were doing work to provide relief for the Philippines. And every year or every month, we would do a different show for a different organization. And that's been some of the highlights of my experience in college. And of course, when you're at amusement parks or you're waiting in line for food, it also brings up the light that you can do card tricks to pass the time. So I know as a consultant, there will be a lot of times where we're traveling and we're probably going to be spending a lot of time in airports for delayed flights. Well, I always bring a deck of cards. So I'm excited to hopefully be able to bring some form of entertainment where we're not crunching away at a PowerPoint or an Excel model, to just bring some card tricks along to the team.
All right, so that's an example of just what a fit interview and a fit question is like, just to make sure we're all on the same page of what it is. So the fit is actually really important. So these are 3 quotes I got from a partner from each McKinsey, Bain, as well as Boston Consulting Group. So the summary of this is that the fit is very important. As in, a lot of people prepare for the case interview, but they forget about the fit. The fit's super important. Again, plenty of smart people who can pass the case interview, again, because we learned that it's a very learnable skill, but do you actually fit into the culture of the firm? So in order to know if you pass it, there's something in consulting called the airport test. And this simply says that when someone is interviewing you, they're asking you questions such as, what do you like to do for fun? What kind of problems have you solved? How do you work in teams? What they're trying to evaluate is that if I'm in the airport with you, would I enjoy being stuck there if there was a snowstorm? So the airport test is just a metric of saying, can I at least put up with this person if we're stuck in the airport for 4 hours? And then there's a higher test that I like to use, which is called the traffic test. So the traffic test simply is this. Do I wish if you and I were in a taxi that secretly there's a traffic jam so that I could spend more time with you? And this is the highest level. You don't have to pass the traffic test. You just have to pass the airport test. But the traffic test is the highest level of passing the fit interview. It's like this person secretly wished that you were there the whole time. So just to give you an example of this actually happening is during the case I talked about earlier today, which was about the school education case, we would often drive from San Francisco all the way down to San Jose south, which is about roughly in good traffic, about a 90-minute drive from San Francisco. And so we were going down to San Jose to work with our client. And then after school let out around 3:30, 4, we decided to go back because it's Friday back to San Francisco. And my manager and I were carpooling, so she was driving. And the manager drove, and we realized, wow, we have terrible timing. It was a holiday weekend or something, and there was just traffic everywhere. And what usually is a 90-minute drive ended up being a 4 hours stuck in traffic. So I was supposed to have dinner with a friend, and she was supposed to have dinner with her husband, and we both totally just missed the dinner, and we were just stuck in traffic. But for those 4 hours, we just really chatted and talked and got to know each other really well in the fact that I knew that she was going to be one of my favorite managers at Bain, and I ended up working for another project with her just because we had that fit, that 4-hour stuck in traffic. So just something to remember is that ultimately you're trying to ask, do I want to be stuck in traffic with these people? That is the highest level. But again, the airport test is the lower end of it, which is kind of at least just deal with you at the airport. And that's pretty much how you know if you pass the fit interview, is using those metrics. But just also realize that every firm is different. So the things that McKinsey looks for is different from the things that Deloitte looks for, which is different from what LEK looks for, which is different from what OC&C looks for, which is different from what Roland Berger looks for, and so forth. And I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by firms looking for different aspects. So here you have a couple of firms here. You have McKinsey, you have BCG, and you have Bain. And notice how their values are very different. So for McKinsey, they're looking a lot for leadership potential and entrepreneurial drive. For BCG, curiosity and intellectual honesty, just because, again, McKinsey is known for building leaders, so you need the leadership potential and entrepreneurial drive. For BCG, they always pride themselves on essentially being the innovators. So if you think about a lot of the breakthroughs in consulting, a lot of it starts with BCG. So a lot of the frameworks start from BCG, or even in recent years, BCG Digital Ventures, as well as BCG Gamma, their big analytics team, all came from obviously BCG. So they're always trying to push the envelope of what we're doing from a intellectual point of view. So curiosity and intellectual honesty is two values that they have. And at Bain cares about entrepreneurial drive as well. For a story I mentioned earlier about when I was asked why I chose Bain over other firms, is one of the things is that because Bain is the smallest of the three, you have to be very entrepreneurial with your resources. It basically means that we don't have as much resources as McKinsey or a BCG consultant. So you have to be very scrappy for what you're doing. And then the second is the culture carrier. Remember that Bain is very locally staffed. As a result, a lot of the people are in the same office day to day versus McKinsey or BCG where you're gone during the week. So as a result, culture is very important for the office. In fact, you might have read that Bain has been voted many years the best place to work by Glassdoor. And that's because of this culture carrier piece. So when they're thinking about, are you going to add culture to the firm? And you can try to look at this as their internal models. So for example, McKinsey and Company always thinks about, what would Marvin do? So Marvin is their modern day founder, and he was considered the first real consultant at McKinsey. And so they have this mantra about what would their founder do in a sticky situation with making decisions with ethics and so forth. So that's like an internal model. So think about being a leader and having that entrepreneurial drive. For BCGs, less common, they don't use it really, but it's this saying called lock insights. And what lock insights means is that how do we continue to push the envelope on what we're doing intellectually to help our clients unlock these insights? Saying. And Bain, most famously and very commonly, so when you start Bain, you literally get a plaque that has this on it. It says, "A Bainey never lets it, never Bainey fail." And this is what it really means, is that we really care about the culture and making sure that people help each other out. So as an example of this is when I was at Bain, I was competing in the World Championships of public speaking. And when I told the staffing manager who's in charge of placing people into projects that I was doing this, she said, "Oh, Davis, wow, that's incredible, actually. So it sounds like you should probably stay local for a little bit." And I said, "Yeah, I would love that." And she said, "Yeah, let me see if I can get you a local case so you can practice and compete for the World Championships." And she also said, "Hey, do you actually know Bain also has a professional development budget? You can actually spend it on hiring a public speaking coach. Do you want me to make an introduction so you can get that?" And so for the first time in my life, I had a professional public speaking coach, all Bain paid for. And I was staffed on local projects so I could actually make these competitions, which is fantastic. And then the third thing that happened was at my competitions, I would have Bainey show up to the earlier rounds of the World Championships when it was very local. And so all the way from the first round all the way, I believe, to the quarterfinals, I had at least one Bainey there all the time, helping me out, giving me critiques on my speeches and so forth. So that's what it means by a Bainey never lets a Bainey fail. But that's something that you won't find in BCG and you'll find in McKinsey. So they value different things. So BCG, for example, does a lot of values for community and family. So one of the things that happens is if you ever have a chance and you attend a BCG event, it's actually open to significant others and kids. But this is not something that happens at Bain. So if you go to an offsite retreat for BCG and you're working there, you can bring your significant other or you can bring a kid. But at Bain, even if you're married to a former partner at Bain, once the partner drops you off for the offsite event, then the former partner, your wife, husband, has to drive off. So that's how inclusive it is into the cultures, only people who work there. So just to show you the contrast between the three firms. So as you can see, every firm has their own different values, but how exactly do you find out these values before you go in for an interview for, let's say, one of these firms or one that's not listed like Oliver Wyman or like a Roland Berger or LEK? How do you find out about that? So what you do is there's 3 things you can do to research a firm's value. The first is interview someone who's already there. So just meet with people who are already working there and discover what is it like to work there. So just meet people and talk to them. Second, as I mentioned, Bain hosts and other firms host many events that are both online as well as offline. So go to these events and actually find out what the culture is like at these firms. And then third, if you cannot find someone to talk to one-on-one and you can't find an event that the firm is hosting you can attend, just go look on Glassdoor. Glassdoor does a great job with this. So for example, if you spent 3 minutes at Glassdoor, you will discover this. You would have discovered a Bain never less, a never Bain fail. And this is in San Francisco where I would have been working and so forth. And he talks about what a Bain never less, a never Bain fail means. And you talk about, for example, how he talks about, or he talks about the culture here as well. So that's what it means to be a Bainey in the Bain office for San Francisco and other firms. So just 3 minutes on Glassdoor, we'll be able to discover all these reviews. In fact, there's like 2.4 thousand reviews here for Bain alone. And I know for a fact that other firms have reviews on Glassdoor as well, so you'll be able to quickly research it. There are 2 types of fit interviews that you need to know about. Similar to the case interviews, how there are 2 styles, interviewer and interviewee led. For a fit interview, there's 2 types of styles. There's something called the inch deep, mile wide interview, and there's something that's the opposite, which is inch wide, mile deep. So let's talk about both of these. So inch deep, mile wide is what it sounds like. So it's literally very thin on the surface, but it's very wide. So basically what that means is that they want to know a little bit of everything. So mile wide means that they want to know a lot about your life, but they only want to know a little bit. So they're just going to throw a bunch of questions at you. For example, tell me about a time you worked on a team. Tell me about a time you had to be a leader. Tell me about a time you failed. So they're not trying to probe for one type of characteristic. They just want to know a little bit about your life during that time. The opposite, which is inch wide, which means there's not many variety of questions, but it's mile deep, means that they're trying to dig deep at the question. So this is famously used at McKinsey as part of their behavioral interview, which is called their personal experience interview, the PEI that I mentioned earlier. So what they'll do is they'll ask you one particular question. For example, tell me about a personal impact you've had on someone's life. Tell me about a problem. Tell me about sometimes you have to be entrepreneurial or whatever it is. And they're going to continue to dig deep on it. So if you tell them an answer, they're going to say, why did you go with that solution versus this? Whatever stakeholders are involved. And they just want to know your rational thinking. So they only ask one particular area, but they go really deep in that area. So be prepared for follow-up questions. It's almost like a stress interview almost, but be prepared for that. So these are the 2 formats that you want to be prepared for. And ideally you can be prepared for both of these with the questions. I'm going to show you a methodology for how you get there. So there's a bunch of common questions that are being asked here. So I call these the big 8, but really there's the big 4 questions, but these are the most common questions you're going to encounter. Obviously it's not exhaustive, but these are the most common in recent memory that we have. So for example, for the big 4s, tell me about yourself, walk me through your resume, why this consulting firm, and why management consulting as a whole. And then you'll be tested also on your entrepreneurial drive. Again, self-drive. Entrepreneurial drive doesn't mean that you have to start a company. It just means that tell me a time that you were self-motivated. There's problem solving, which is tell me about a time you dealt with a tough problem. A lot on leadership, a lot on impact, personal impact, working with others, being fun to work with, and just this coachability piece that we talked about being able to learn from your past mistakes and get feedback. These are the most common questions that you'll encounter for a mile wide, inch deep interview. For a miles deep interview, there's only really 3 questions that McKinsey will ask you. One is they're going to ask you about your entrepreneurial drive. They're going to ask you about your leadership, and they'll talk about personal impact, just basically those 3 things. And if you're wondering how I found these, and well, one is experience over 400 people, and a lot of them have interviewed with McKinsey, and my own McKinsey experience, of course. But the other is literally on their website that they talk about these are the values. So again, don't overcomplicate things, simplify it, and just go on the website and literally they tell you what you need to do. No magic on that. So I'm about to teach you a methodology that took me nearly 6,000 hours to think of, which is a framework for how to answer these fit questions. So as I mentioned, I love competing in the World Championships of Public Speaking. And one of the events that happens in the World Championships is what is similar to impromptu speaking. So this is when you walk on the stage and you get a topic to speak about, and you literally have no time to think about it. You just have to speak. So for example, a topic might be, what would you something simple like, what would you tell your 13-year-old self? Or it might be a more complex question as how does a potato feel? That's probably one of the harder questions I had to answer was, how does a potato feel? And the master of ceremonies handed you a potato as you were going on stage. So different types of questions, but I had to think about a framework for how to answer it very consistently so I would be able to win this side event for the impromptu, which I have done, which is a pretty awesome event. So what I ended up creating was a framework for how to answer it. But first, I need to tell you what drives this framework and how I think about the approach. So the secret to great answers is this. This is probably the key to great public speaking. It's not about, delivery is important, but it's not the most important thing. Content is there, but there's one piece in particular, and this is the secret to great public speaking. People don't remember what you say, but they will never forget the way you made them feel. And if you remember this, your answers will be great for the fit questions. So just think about your favorite movies. WALL-E is one of mine. And just think about, I don't even remember half the dialogue in WALL-E. In fact, I didn't speak for like half the movie. But what I'll never forget is the feeling it made me when I first left my first screening of WALL-E and future screenings. So think about your favorite movie and the emotional impact it had because it told a very beautiful story. So the secret to great answers for the fit interview is to tell stories. And to tell stories, I like to use something called the A-STARE or A-STAR method. So what this simply is once you look at A-STARE or A-STAR, it all stands for something. The first one is answer. Whatever the question I'm being asked, I like to give a one-sentence answer to that question. Then I like to set up the situation, the S. When did this happen? Where was this? Who was involved? Then it was the tension. What was the conflict? So if there's no conflict, there's no story. There's no memorable story. Action. What actions did I take to resolve this tension? Results. What were the results of my action? And then effects. What did I learn? What did I learn from this event in my life that allowed me to be able to be the person that I am? So this is the type of framework that I like to use for my fit interviews, as well as when I'm competing in the world championships for the impromptu speaking, is I use the same format. So no matter if I'm being asked what I'm going to tell my 13-year-old self, or I'm being asked what a potato feels, then I always use this particular format. And where you get the biggest return is making sure that you find stories that have a lot of tension, but the resolution of it is quite good. So even if you haven't seen WALL-E, think about your favorite movie where there was a high tension conflict and then the results of it. So recently, think about The Avengers, think about Game of Thrones, think about your favorite TV show, think about pretty much a lot of things where you're like, there's so much tension in the air. And then they cut to commercial, or when commercials existed, and then they came back for the results. So just think about those as your biggest return. But again, information is not enough. You need to take action on it. So let's go through an example. So we're going to go through this question of tell me about yourself, which essentially is about your personal values. So the first thing I ever like to do when I think about the behavioral and for our clients as well is I have them map out the potential stories. So for example, let's say that what you want to tell people is that you're a very gritty person. Grit is what you value. So then what I like to do is brainstorm ideas about stories that demonstrate grit. So for example, losing my first college election, but eventually becoming president of that club, getting over 200 scholarships or rejection, but still applying, learning magic while others were already performing, talk about cold emailing my favorite authors to become mentors, selling my first product and making sales cold calls, or overcoming my fear of public speaking by competing in competitions. So any of these would be great stories. So the key is just to pick one that you resonate with. And for me, I just like to, no one ever sees this. So it doesn't have to be 6, but it could be 10, it could be 3, whatever it is. List out all the stories for each of the questions or for this particular question we're starting on. And then you just, second, is just pick one to start with. Doesn't matter. Pick one that you think is good. So in this case, I'm picking this one, which is getting rejected by 200 scholarships, but still having the perseverance or the grit to continue. So this is how I apply the A-STAR format. So remember, framework here is answer, situation, tension, action, results, and effect. So effect is in parentheses because you don't always have to have it. So sometimes there's no effect, and other times there are. So I want to make it optional if there is an effect. So this is how I think about how to answer the fit questions. So let's apply it. So one sentence answer to the question of tell me about yourself is, one thing people tell me is that I don't give up easily. One sentence, that's it. Then you have the situation. What happened, who was involved, and where was this? So situation is, before moving to New Haven for college, I grew up in a low-income community where going to college was a dream, but not an expectation for most kids. I grew up in a community where our school system was called the worst in the US. So I set up the situation here about the story I'm about to tell. Then you have the tension. But growing up, I knew I wanted to be the first person in my family to go to college and live up to the dreams of my grandparents and parents who gave up everything to come to America so I could have this chance. The problem was I didn't have a role model since my teachers and counselors were figuring out how to keep kids from starting fights, dropping out, or going to jail. But I knew I wanted to go to the best university I could and graduate debt free. So you see the tension here is that I want something, I want to go to college, but my circumstances don't quite align with me going to college just yet. So that's me setting up the tension. And if you remember, the tension is one of the biggest areas where you want to set up. Imagine the movie again, a movie. The conflict is what you remember, because if there's no conflict, there's not really a reason to watch the movie. Then the actions, what actions did I take to resolve the tension? So I would say something like, to fund my way to college, since I didn't understand financial aid, I decided to apply to a list of 200 scholarships my sophomore year. And I started applying to every single scholarship I could find, including one called Women Entering Technology. They rejected me, by the way, if anyone's curious. Women Entering Technology did not take me. And over 3 years, 179 other rejections came, and they're hanging on my bedroom wall to remind me that I'm still alive and keep going. And every time I got rejected, I would ask for feedback about how to improve for my next application. So that's the action I took. And then what was the result? And eventually I started winning scholarships, and eventually I would get a full ride to both Harvard, Yale, and a bunch of other schools as well. So that's the resolution of it. And then the effect of this is that what did I learn from the story that applies to what the situation is at? While this event took place in high school, because it did take place many years ago, I think it tells you a lot about who I am, that I don't give up. At Yale, I might not be the smartest, but no one is going to outwork me. And in my extracurriculars, I might not have the connections to raise a lot of money, but I bet you I will knock on every door and code emails I need. So this sets up the example of that I'm willing to work hard, and you can also use this too. So I use the story for one of my Bain interviews, and I would talk about how at Bain, I know that Bain doesn't have all the resources as a McKinsey, as a BCG, but given my background, I'm willing to work hard and be resourceful when it comes to helping our clients get results. And so that's the idea that comes out of this ACE-STAIR format for when you think about how to answer a question for it. Okay, so let's see. All right, so got a question, I will answer those in the next Q&A. So that's how I think about the areas of how you can improve and work on your own fit stories. All right, so a couple things is you can see here, when you take the ACE-STAIR format and make it completely down, you just have basically have your whole fit story already written out. And of course, you can revise it and so forth, but it's very easy. You can see that this is how I laid out my fit, and this is how I make the fit equal out to each of the firms, but at the same time, not overspending time. Just using these ACE-STAIR format. And then step 4 is just apply it to the other stories. So you have a bunch of other stories here. So I apply it to every one of the stories I wrote down. And then I picked the best 3, and I refine it. So you're probably wondering, why 3 stories? The reason of 3 stories is that oftentimes when you go to an interview, you're going to have 2 interviewers, most likely, but sometimes you're going to have 3 interviewers. And what I like to do is prepare 3 stories just in case there's 3 interviewers and they didn't coordinate. So they all ask the same question. So what happened in my final round for my McKinsey interview was that I had 3 interviewers. And unlike most things, I don't have the data to back this up, but they all asked me the same question about my ability to solve problems. So I had 3 problem solving stories. I gave them each a different one. So I just imagined that when they went back and they're like, yeah, that Davis candidate, what do you think of him? Yeah, his fit was great. He talked about being his family being a farmer. So I was like, farmers. And then the interviewer was like, farmers. He talked to me about how he was able to learn magic and do a benefit show. I was like, wait, magic? And then the interviewer was like, oh, he talked to me about the scholarships. So that's what I want to have happen, is that people are talking about you more than they should in a positive light, because you're providing 3 stories. And plus 3 stories also allows you to just not sit down and go on the first one that comes to mind for you. So as a result, you won't be able to just assume that one is better. By having 3, you know which ones are the best, and you align them up so that you know which ones are good. And so that's why 3 stories. And I just repeat the same process for all these other major questions. And then you have your entire fit story built out for all the most common questions. Of course, and a word on delivery is, so I know a lot of you guys are not as confident on your delivery, as in you're nervous, you speak quickly or so forth. One thing I want you to remember is when you go into an interview, it's all about mindset. I want you to believe that you can do it. So I learned this mindset from someone who shared the story of me of George Clooney, who's one of my favorite actors. And if anyone has ever followed the career of George Clooney, you realize that in the early days, when he moved to Los Angeles, he was actually pretty much he didn't get callbacks. So the famous George Clooney that we know today didn't get a lot of the roles that he auditioned for because he was always thinking about, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay my bills? How I need this role to launch my career. And then his manager, was it his coach, said to him, hey, George, look, I want you to go in there and pretend that you are going to solve their problem. So he went into every single audition afterwards thinking, you know what, this person has spent 8 hours auditioning different people. I am going to be the person they cast. I'm going to solve their problem so they don't even have to have any more auditions. And this is essentially what happened with the interviews, was that George was able to come in, George Clooney was able to go into these interviews and think, these people want me because they are not going to spend any more time losing auditions just to have an actor. And this is how I want you guys to go into interviews. Imagine that you're McKinsey, Bain, BCG, who your interviewers, they don't want to spend 8 to 10 hours a day interviewing people just to reject you. They want to accept you. So just realize that people want you to succeed and have this mindset. Mindset is so important. Just have this mindset. And just to prove how important mindset is, I want to show you an example of, as I mentioned earlier, in order for anyone to even work with my team, they have to go through an application process as well as an interview process before they can even get on our service. And one of the things that I test for is mindset. Do you believe that you have the ability to be a consultant? And if you don't, then you're not a really good fit to work with us. The reason is that if we're going to invest this much time, I can teach you how to master a case, even if you don't have a business background. I can teach you how to make your resume stand out, even if you're a pre-med or you don't have that much business experience. I can make all that and teach you how to do that. But I cannot get you to believe in yourself. That's hard. So we get a lot of applicants. And this is from earlier, so 2 weeks ago. We had an applicant who reached out, we had an interview, and he basically was not a good fit because he had this thing where he said, even though he had a higher GPA, a little bit more work experience, and his schools weren't completely non-target schools. He had a lot more going for him than a lot of our clients. One thing that he said to me is this line in purple here is that I fear I may be a very unlikely hire for many of your firms your team has connections with and success with in the past. The reason that I'm thinking about this is that you've already seen the stories of a lot of people who've gone through this program or who've gone through and have done it. We talked about Daniel the composer. We talked about Patrick the accountant. We talked about Crystal, who was the PhD. We talked about all these people. And when you don't believe in yourself, I literally told him, hey, look, it's not a good fit for us to work together because I can teach you all the things that you need to succeed. I can teach you how to have a GPA, how to have the work experience, how to have your school choice, how to have all these. But ultimately, I can't teach you to believe in yourself. And if you don't believe in yourself, then I don't want to waste your time or the time of my team. So mindset is huge. If you don't believe that you can do it, you're going to not succeed. So put another way, think about if you were trying to get someone to drive a car, and say someone's having difficulties coming in and out there. All right, so imagine that you're trying to think about driving a car, and I'm about to be teaching you how to drive a car. And yet before you even get in the car, I can teach you how to drive the car, how to be safe and all that. But imagine if you get in the car and all you're thinking is you're going to crash the car. I don't want to be in the car with you teaching you how to drive. So that's how important mindset is for all of this. So when it comes to the fit, mindset, remember, and a couple of things is when it comes to the fit, spend time on the fit so you can pass the airport test. Know which questions are most likely to come up depending on the firms you're interviewing with, and use the ACR format to create answers that stand out.